Hello, my name is Max Wei, and I teach at the Marshall School of Business at the USC. I conduct research in quantitative marketing and business analytics. One of my research areas is on the intersection between marketing and finance. Today, in this 10-minute video, I'm going to talk about Bitcoin. And the basic idea of this talk comes from a piece of research I have recently conducted with my colleague, Anthony Dukes, a professor here at the USC as well. Today, we are not going to focus on the technological issues about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in general. Instead, we are going to focus on the business side of Bitcoin. Particularly, I'm going to ask whether the price bubbles of Bitcoin could affect the adoption of Bitcoin as a piece of new technology. This question actually relates to what I think are the two major business problems about Bitcoin. First, Bitcoin market is a financial market. You can use Bitcoin as a currency. You probably know that people also invest in Bitcoin just like buying stocks. You might also have heard that Bitcoin price was sometimes a bubble, and people want to know what are causing these big bubbles that we normally do not see with government-issued currencies. We'll talk about this today. But at the same time, Bitcoin is a product. Just like any product, each cryptocurrency needs to be marketed. Growing user base can be very difficult. People can use dollars, people can use credit cards, people can use other cryptocurrencies. As a creator of a cryptocurrency, you need to market your cryptocurrency just as a new product. So far, we have tended to look at these two problems separately. Price bubbles as a financial problem, whereas how to gain user base as a marketing problem. Today we are going to see whether the two problems are actually connected, and whether by recognizing this connection we can get a new perspective the next time we look at this emerging market of Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency in general. First, let's spend just a few minutes on the very basics of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, a digital currency built on a technology called blockchain. For our purposes, we do not need to get into the details of blockchain. Simply put, it's a piece of technology that makes a currency secure and safe without a centralized authority, such as the banking system that supports the dollars. You can go and buy Bitcoin using dollars and vice versa. Once you have Bitcoin, you can spend it buying groceries, electronics, or cars from sellers that accept the Bitcoin. Maybe you have not realized this, but there are quite a few companies that accept the Bitcoin. Examples include Microsoft, Starbucks, Whole Foods, Home Depot, Newegg, and the list is growing. If you are thinking about buying some Bitcoin, a very important question is how much one coin is going to cost you. So here is the graph for the historical Bitcoin price expressed in dollars. As you can see, it is much more volatile than the price of a government-issued currency, say euro for example. If we look into the Bitcoin price history, there have been a few major spikes, later recognized as bubbles. The first major Bitcoin bubble was in November 2013 when the Bitcoin price rose to a peak of over $1,200. Note, in year 2011, just 2 years before this bubble, the value of one Bitcoin was less than $1. The second big bubble happened in December 2017 when the price reached the historical peak of $19,783. Followed by a large reduction down to $3,000. The third big jump happened recently in year 2019. Currently, the Bitcoin price is hovering around $10,000. At this point, one might be asking, is there any meaning to the Bitcoin price if it is so volatile? This touches the fundamental question of what determines the price of a cryptocurrency. From the perspective of economic fundamentals, the value of Bitcoin should come from the convenience it brings to transactions, just like any other currency. They are all designed for the same purpose, a medium of exchange. For example, when you have a used textbook which you want to exchange for a sandwich, you can first sell your book to someone who can give Bitcoin to you, and then use the Bitcoin to buy from a sandwich seller who accepts Bitcoin. This process is easier than trying to directly find someone who simultaneously wants your textbook and is a sandwich seller. If, and this is a big if, there are sufficiently many people who hold and accept Bitcoin. As you can see, the value of Bitcoin heavily relies on the number of people that use it. We sometimes call this the network effects. That is, the value of a product increases with the user base of this product. But this fundamental value cannot explain the volatile price of Bitcoin. So here is the historical number of Bitcoin accounts, which can be a proxy of Bitcoin user base. As you can see, it is far more stable or less volatile than the Bitcoin price we just saw. As it turns out, there's another force that drives the price of Bitcoin and in some sense detaches the price from its fundamental value. This force is known as speculation. A speculator can gain profits by buying Bitcoin today at $10,000 and sell it tomorrow, as long as the Bitcoin price rises above $10,000 tomorrow, regardless of whether a coin is really fundamentally worth $10,000. Such speculative gains attract investors. The buying and selling of Bitcoin by these speculative investors cause the price of Bitcoin to detach from its fundamental value. So far, we have been talking about the financial side of Bitcoin. Now we are going to look at the marketing side by asking what are the impacts of such volatile prices. You might say, well, as a starter, the giant price bubbles might have got public attention. In fact, the 2017 bubble was all over the news. This is exactly where I want to discuss the marketing side of Bitcoin. Why is this impact on public attention so important? That is because as marketers, we all know that people's attention is usually very hard to get. Companies pay millions of dollars of advertising expenses to get people's attention. Now here, if price bubbles can gain attention, in some sense, they are free advertising for the Bitcoin as a new product. Indeed, there is some evidence for this attention impact. So here is the Google trend for the word Bitcoin. Does this pattern look familiar to you? We see peaks exactly around the dates of Bitcoin bubbles. Very obvious jumps around November 2013 and December 2017. The jump in year 2019 is less clear, perhaps signifying that people at that point of time already got used to the volatile price of Bitcoin. The largest jump happening in year 2017, around the time of the largest price bubble of Bitcoin in history. In other words, people's interest reflected in the volume of Google search surged as the Bitcoin price surged. We can also find similar coincidences if we look at the Google trend for blockchain instead of Bitcoin. We can imagine that many people got to know Bitcoin and blockchain because of the price bubbles. Marketers also know that getting people's attention is one thing, getting them to adopt your product is another thing. So the question is whether the increased public attention actually brought in more users for the Bitcoin. And the answer appears to be affirmative as we look at the historical number of Bitcoin wallet accounts, which can be used again as a proxy for the user base of Bitcoin. Around December 2017, we can see much steeper ascension in the number of Bitcoin accounts. This matches the peak in the Google trend. We would find a very similar pattern if we look at the 2013 bubble instead. So here we are. Price bubbles are accompanied with surges in Google trend as well as accelerations of adoption. So it is conceivable that the price bubbles of Bitcoin may very well have served as accelerators of Bitcoin adoption. And do not forget, as more people adopt Bitcoin, the Bitcoin becomes a better medium of exchange due to the network effects, which then attracts even more people to use Bitcoin. But in some sense, this is definitely not the end of the story. The acceleration of adoption of a currency, or more precisely, the expectation of such acceleration, can in turn affect the price of this currency. This brings our talk back to the financial side of things. In finance, we know that expectation can drive price. The expectation of future growth of a company typically makes investors rush to buy the stocks of the company, leading to an increase in the current price of the stocks. The same reasoning applies to Bitcoin. As we discussed a few minutes ago, the size of user base forms the fundamental value of a currency. Therefore, if there's an expectation of a faster growth of user base, investors will be more willing to buy the Bitcoin, driving up its price. Now, putting together what we have talked about on the financial side and the marketing side of Bitcoin, we can reach the following picture. A Bitcoin price bubble leads to an acceleration of the growth of Bitcoin user base. But at the same time, the expectation of such acceleration of growth in turn fuels the price bubble. So here we have a reinforcing loop between the price bubble and adoption acceleration. This reinforcing loop makes bubbles easier to form in the first place, and it gives us a new perspective to explain the volatile price of Bitcoin. Now, if you think about it, price bubbles actually play a role in marketing beyond just in Bitcoin. In some markets, firms make limited editions of their products, and this can lead buyers to bid up the prices, which then draw attention of media as well as consumers. This attention gives prestige to the brand. Expecting this prestige, buyers may be more willing to pay a higher price for the limited edition in the first place. So here, consciously or unconsciously, companies are using bubbles for marketing.